Welcome to TheKillFile, your favorite true crime podcast. I'm your host, Brittany Spears. Each week, we will explore the dark corners of true crime, unsolved mysteries, and murder. Join me as we uncover secrets, investigate evidence, and dive into the chilling details of some of the most fascinating cases. Get ready for a journey into the dark unknown because, in TheKillFile, nothing stays buried forever. Hello, and welcome to episode 84 of TheKillFile. I am so glad that you guys are back for another story. Before we jump into today's case, a few quick reminders. First off, don't forget to follow us on social media. We are on Blue Sky, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. Also, if you're interested in my more personal musings, you can follow my page on Facebook. It's just my name with KillFile after. Next, please take a second to rate, review, subscribe, or follow, whichever your app needs of you, to get the latest episodes every Monday, and it's the best way to support the podcast if you're interested in helping out. Finally, don't forget to check out the website, TheKillFile.com, where you can find our merch shop. We have all kinds of good stuff on there. I hope that you will check them out. It supports the podcast also, and it helps spread the word when you wear some of the merch around for us. Also, while you are on the website, you can fill out the form for the listener files and share your own true crime experience for a chance to be on an episode in the bonus content called The Hidden Files. The Hidden Files is now available for just $3 a month on Patreon or Spotify, where you will get 2 bonus episodes each month circling true crime, but they will be slightly different. For example, a few of the episodes that either have already come out or will be coming out are con man Victor Lustig and his shenanigans, the Rikers Island plane crash near the prison and its outcome, and even Al Capone himself. I hope that you guys will join us on Thursdays for those. That's it for business. Let's talk about today's case. Today, I was feeling in the mood for a good cult story. So, we are going to cover the longest name I've ever seen for a cult, the Movement for the Restoration of the 10 Commandments of God. Trigger warnings for today are going to be murder and brainwashing. Let's get to it. Today's story is going to take us to East Africa in Uganda. Our story begins in the late 80s as Uganda was going through some major transitions and trauma stemming from their own civil war that had taken place from 1980 to 1986. Since the end of their civil war in 1986, a group called the LRA, the Lord's Resistance Army, would be an opposition group that was led by self-proclaimed messiah and religious leader Joseph Kony, who had been trying to kick down the Ugandan government. There was political tension and violence taking place as globalhistorydialogues.org states, quote, 2 million people have been forcibly displaced as a result of violence against the civilian population, the kidnapping of thousands of youths to expand the ranks of armed groups, and clashes between it and the armed forces, end quote. The goal of the LRA, according to an AI overview of gathered information, was to overthrow the Ugandan government to essentially create a new state that would be based on the personal interpretation of what was said to be the 10 Commandments. I guess this LRA group had come from another movement-type group called the Holy Spirit Movement, which also wanted to overthrow the president and take over the government, but this was defeated, hence why Joseph Kony would rise with the LRA. Thankfully, according to research, the LRA was finally kicked out of Uganda around 2005-2006, when Joseph Kony would run due to being indicted. Him and his commanders were charged with crimes such as murder, enslavement, sexual enslavement, rape, and 21 counts of war crimes, which included the cruel treatment of civilians, murder, directing attacks on civilians, pillaging, inducing rape, and forced enlistments of children into the rebel ranks. This, all according to Britannica. He has yet to be found, but according to some reports from 2024, they believe that he's in the area of the Central African Republic. Needless to say, around the time that today's cult started, there was a lot going on in Uganda with a humanitarian crisis, which was also part of their economy seeming to start to collapse, and infrastructures like hospitals, schools, roads, etc. were being destroyed. One thing that I found particularly interesting with the AI overview of this time period in Uganda was the devastation and trauma when it came to children in particular. I guess millions of kids were traumatized and orphaned with everything that was going on in their country, which is absolutely heartbreaking. By the 90s, Uganda was slowly starting to rebuild its economy and trying to stabilize itself as it was continuously fighting off the HIV/AIDS problem, and it was said that they were mostly successful during their fight. The fight between different groups was ongoing, but there was a light at the end of the tunnel. One of the problems that came along with this country's unrest was also the religious movements that were happening at the same time, due to the wars, violence, and ongoing conflicts of rebellion groups. This would lay the foundation for things like movement groups or cults to pop up and flourish, and boy did they. This brings us to our topic of today, the movement for the restoration of the Ten Commandments of God, which I had already planned on shortening to MRTCG, and I guess that was common, which I didn't know. The MRTCG would be founded by two individuals that we will get to in a sec, but before we do, we need a little tidbit of information. The MRTCG was on the outskirts of the Catholic Church. It had ideals similar to Catholicism, but it wasn't exactly the same. One of the two founders would come from a group of quote-unquote seers. What are seers, you ask? Yeah, let me explain. According to encyclopedia.com, the MRTCG would sort of come from what was called an epidemic of apparitions of the Virgin Mary herself, and even Jesus, in different areas of practiced Catholicism in Africa. Many of them were not, however, recognized by the Roman Catholic Church. The apparitions, which I will call visions because apparitions are ghosts, really, and maybe they thought they were seeing the ghost of Mary, but to me, I don't believe in that kind of stuff, so it is better explained as a vision, however, to each their own. So people were having these visions of the Virgin Mary before and even after there had been like a series of famous visions happening in Kibeho, Rwanda. During the years of 1980 to 1989, there were allegedly 7 different seers that had not only been encouraged but approved by the Catholic hierarchy itself. It started really in November of 1981 on the 28th when 3 young women claimed to have seen visions of Mary herself while all 3 of them were at the same boarding school. Mary had allegedly told these 3 women that there would be a horrific catastrophe if people didn't start to change their ways from the current violence and hatred they were practicing. This would actually later be seen as prophetic, like a warning that came true when one of the most notorious genocides happened in 1994 in Rwanda. There were nearly 1 million people who were killed. I had to look all of this stuff up because I'm dumb and I didn't know any of this. These visions would be what led to the cult MRTCG forming in the first place. The visions that would lead to the cult would all start in 1987 when numerous Catholics would allege that they had seen the Virgin Mary in the southwestern region of Uganda, and where one particular girl, who claimed to have been in some sort of connection to the Kibeho ones, however, she wasn't one of the approved seers. After this young lady moved to both the diocese of, sorry if I butcher any of these names, Mbarara and Masaka, which are Roman Catholic ecclesiastical jurisdictions in southwestern Uganda, she would start a movement in Mumbai. Now, here is where some new seers were, including Paul Kashaku, and more importantly, his daughter, one of the co-founders of the MRTCG, Credonia Murwende. Credonia, which I've also heard as Caledonia, but it's spelled Credonia, so I'm going to say that, was said to have grown up on her father's farm in a small village called Kunugu. There stood a larger red-bricked Catholic church, which one source was said to actually have been the largest building that was anywhere close for miles. Credonia was said to have had 3 brothers as well as 2 sisters. She would go to church at the Catholic missionary school for about 2 years, but when she left school, she was still unable to even sign her own name, which made me wonder, what were they really learning? She would help her parents in the fields while she was in her teenage years until she would go to work for a businessman, said to be his housekeeper of sorts. After this, Credonia was said to have actually run something called a sheben, which I had to look up. It is like an unlicensed bar, basically, and for Credonia's place, it was in a rented hut. In her sheben, they would offer for just 2 shillings a flask of, according to The Guardian, quote, banana-based hooch. I wonder what that tastes like. Oh my God, that can't be for the faint of heart. Also, according to the article in The Guardian, while most of the people in her town would spend their Sundays at church, Credonia would instead work at her bar and mock the people who were faithful enough to attend each and every Sunday. People who knew Credonia would say that she had a way with men, a way that she could get what she wanted, and was later a self-admitted sex worker. And eventually, she married one of her Johns. She was also said to have a temper that would be on occasions violent. Towards the end of the 1980s, Credonia's bar wasn't very successful, and people in town didn't really seem to care for her much, and the AIDS epidemic was starting to make Credonia's work much more dangerous. So, at 37 years old, she sought out a new career path. Now, let's talk about the MRTCG's other co-founder, a 56-year-old man named Joseph Kibutire. Joseph was said to have grown up with a family who were not only devout Catholics, but were also said to be quite wealthy. Joseph would marry a woman named Teresa, and it was said that Joseph would become a father to 8 children. Sources said that somewhere along the line, Joseph had tried his hand in politics, but had lost his position in the Public Works Commission when the person that was ruling at the time was kicked out. So Joseph would go back to some land that he owned and sought and relied heavily on his faith and the church to get him through. Joseph's kids would describe how their childhood seemingly revolved around faith and how they had to attend church, prayed in their homes before school, and sought out their rosaries before bed. Eventually, Joseph would open up a Catholic school and he would actually run it himself. Because he had donated the land, supplies, and funding money for the church, the community really came to like Joseph, and he was a respected pillar of their community. After the school had opened, Joseph had claimed he himself had started seeing visions of the Virgin Mary. Now back to Credonia. There would be a man that was on this little video about this cult that I will link in the sources below, where a man named Eric Mazima would describe how Credonia had told him about this specific rock, and how to her it had taken on the shape of the Virgin Mary in a vision. Credonia's family were said to be visionary mediums. Her father, Paul, had once seen a vision of Credonia's sister's death. I was very curious if that vision ever came true. On the video, Eric would describe how Credonia brought him to this rock, stating that he would meet the Virgin Mary. And when they had reached the rock, Credonia told Eric to look from every angle at the rock, and then the Virgin Mary would appear to him. He would also say that Credonia went into some kind of trance and didn't speak for 10 minutes. When Eric didn't see the Virgin Mary, Credonia explained how she saw it as Mary turning her back on the world because of our sins. After this, Credonia's visions had spread and tons of people came to see what she saw for themselves. So there's a little confusion as to how Credonia and Joseph met. Some sources say that when Credonia had heard about Joseph having visions of the Virgin Mary, that she and one of her sisters, Ursula, sought out Joseph, and others said that Joseph had sought out the rock that Credonia had seen as the Virgin Mary. Either way, when the two met, Credonia would apparently tell Joseph that the Virgin Mary had decreed that she was to come and live with his family. So there was some thought as to the fact that Credonia was able to manipulate people, and that was her real talent, maybe not so much a medium. So was she using her faith and these quote-unquote visions to find a new place to belong or new work while her own life was starting to head down a broken path? When Joseph brought Credonia back to his farm and home with his family, he, according to one of his sons, named Juvenal Rugambwa, that they were some of the luckiest people in the entire world because they were among 2 people who got messages from the Virgin Mary herself. He truly believed that Mary had sent Credonia. Juvenal would say that this is when the quote-unquote nonsense started, stating that his father was smart and educated and that his mom was even a teacher, but somehow they still both believed these visions and what Credonia was saying to be true. It was also known that Joseph and Teresa had been in contact with various cults that had to do with the Virgin Mary located in Australia and even in the US. Remember, this was the peak time for various cults to arise as people sought guidance and faith outside of the Catholic Church. Teresa would recall that Credonia was seemingly some sort of religious officer, and whatever she said went. So these two were the founding members of the MRTCG, but there were some higher-ups that would also be a large part of this cult, and not only in its founding, but in its power and its credentials to others. About an hour away from where Joseph and now Credonia were living would be a Catholic priest who was said to be excommunicated from the church, but fully believed in these so-called sightings of the Virgin Mary. Now, I'm not sure if this priest was excommunicated before or after he joined, but just go with me. The priest was Father Dominic Catarabarbo and his assistant, Paul Ikaziri. Credonia would say that her vision from Mary would say that Father Dominic would be a larger part of bringing Credonia's visions to the rest of the world. After Father Dominic and Paul questioned her for what Paul said were hours, they too believed in her. Credonia, Joseph, and Father Dominic would really be the ones who started the MRTCG, and Credonia's sister Ursula would be one of the leaders in the movement. It was said in sources that at the time, the scandals that were coming out of the Catholic Church is sort of what veered people in different directions from the traditional Catholic Church. Paul would say that the thing that drew him to the MRTCG, it could be seen as a protest to the Catholic Church that seemed to be quote-unquote backsliding, and that the world had seemed to be set up to almost end, and that in the beginning, as it is with almost all cults, their intentions started off as good. Father Dominic, only like a week after meeting Credonia, would allow her to preach to his flock. She would tell the Mass that God was angry at the world and that his patience was running out from all of the sin seen around the world. Specifically, one person remembers her speaking about the sins of adultery as well as homosexuality, she said. Excuse me, not only have same-sex couples been around since like 2400 BCE in Egypt, and possibly before, but it's in nature, fuck you. She would further say that God was annoyed with humankind and wanted to kill off the world, and only if people would abandon their lives and follow what she said and the supposed messages coming from Mary would they be able to escape damnation and death. Okay, you freak, how many different apocalypses has there supposed to have been? How many different times has the world claimed to have ended or about to end? And here we still are. I'm so sick of all these doomsday fuckers who bring people in out of fear, or people who are easily swayed, or even taking advantage of people looking for something to believe in, and then just cause chaos, death, and destruction. I mean, look at fucking Chad and Lori Daybell. And she still believes that bullshit as she sits in prison for murdering her own fucking children, playing a part in her ex-husband's murder, who was seemingly a good guy, and helping or plotting in Chad's poor wife's murder as well. You crazy fucking bastards have no idea what you're talking about, and no common fucking sense. And yet others have to pay with their lives? It's such bullshit. Father Dominic, having joined the MRTCG, gave some credit, or seemed to have strengthened the credit given to this movement. Credonia would be the high priestess who gave messages from the Virgin Mary. Joseph would be seen as the patriarchal head figure and was the bankroll to get this thing started. And Father Dominic would be the validity of the Catholic religion. Father Dominic was also said to have been seen in a certain light because he had been educated in both the United States and Australia, and that was a big deal. He had a degree in religious studies from the Loyola Marymount University in LA, but then of course he had to take it a step further and lie that he had a PhD, but he didn't. The movement would start in a compound, but they would essentially be kicked out of there and would instead land at a compound that was on a piece of land that Credonia's father had given them that was located in the Kanungu district. The MRTCG would erect buildings for recruitment, an elementary school, and even houses. One source would say that new recruits had to fork over their worldly possessions to help pay for everything, but that it was not cheap. And in fact, Joseph would end up having to sell multiple pieces of his own properties, some of his milling equipment, and even his own car to help pay for things in the beginning. Credonia would explain in the beginning, where there were maybe 250 followers, that the Lord wanted them to be in complete silence except for prayer. And this, of course, would be said as how God wanted them to refrain from lying and therefore sinning. This would be why later on, when people outside of their compound would see the members of the MRTCG, they would comment on how quiet they were, and also unassuming, and that they didn't seem threatening in the least. It was also known later on that some of the members would use handwritten signs to communicate as well as hand gestures. Someone who had been on the inside of the compound would say as they went about their days, seemingly praying most of the day and working, that sometimes the leaders would stop everyone for them to be able to listen to the newest message from the high priestess. It was known that Credonia could not read or write, so the others would write her messages, and one such message that was in their original doctrines that they were forced to study often was about how the Lord told Credonia that hurricanes from heaven were going to rain down and spread all over those who have not repented, and only the followers would be saved. Those who will repent and come back to God will be the ones that are allowed to come back to year one of the next generation, and they, of course, would be called the redeemed. This doctrine would be in the form of a booklet the MRTCG would publish in the 90s as the cult grew, and the name of the booklet was, quote, "A Timely Message from Heaven, the End of Present Time." I will try to post a pic of it this week. There wasn't anything specific in the doctrine of like anything special that the members of the MRTCG had to do. Like in the beginning of the New World, there wasn't any special like ascension or anything that we've seen in other cults. However, they did seem to be an apocalyptic cult, which, no offense to anyone with these beliefs, to each their own, but I know that there are still people out there who strongly believe in the second coming of Jesus Christ and that the 144,000 people or whatever will be the only ones left behind or taken or whatever. I guess it's still kind of apocalyptic to me. I always wonder why so many religious beliefs center around fear. Even for myself. I mean, it took me until I was in my mid-30s, late 30s. I'm only 39. To realize that I don't have a belief in God because I was just so afraid of my Catholicism roots and thought just like, what if I'm wrong? What if? It's all fear-based. The members of the MRTCG wore what were more like traditional Catholic garment, as in the women wore what nuns or sisters would wear, and the men all looked like Catholic priests. Although it took a while to become this way, eventually the land around the compound would be used as pineapple and banana plantations, and they would eventually become self-sustaining. One member would later say that not only were men and women, even if they were married, they were separated, always. But parents had to basically give up their children in order to stay on the compound. Children did not live with their parents. In fact, children lived separately away from the adults. Joseph's son, Juvenal, would say that the children, or at least some of them, if not all, I couldn't really understand this part on the video very well, but I know for a fact that there was children kept in this barn place, but I don't know if it was all the time or not. They were kept there, and he said that they would end up sick and malnourished, and they would die in that barn. The barn's windows were boarded from the outside, which is absolutely awful. Not only are you depriving the children sunshine or fresh air, but what if a fucking fire breaks out? Juvenal would also speak to the fact that if a child died, they would take a fucking suitcase and they would put the body inside and they would put it in a vehicle and take it away at night. There would also come an announcement from Credonia in the early 90s that the Catholic Church had been inundated by Satan himself and that the Virgin Mary wanted them to all find a new church. Remember, they were still based in Catholicism, and the leaders of the MRTCG would accuse the bishop of whatever church they were going to as being one of Satan's henchmen. So the bishop accused the leaders of the MRTCG of heresy. Heresy, for anyone who doesn't know, because I had to look it up, is to deny or go against or change the core doctrines of an established belief system. I'm sorry, but after learning the definition of this word, I'm pretty sure 97% of religions have committed heresy. Just saying. The bishop would say that the thing that shocked them the most was that none of the other people could talk to the bishop and or look them in the eye. He was actually kind of chuckling about how nuts it was. The bishop then excommunicated all of them. Apparently, Credonia also excommunicated the bishop, which also made him chuckle. The leaders of the MRTCG believed they, along with their followers, were the quote-unquote true believers, as many who are in a cult do. That always seems to be a gold standard of a cult is no. What everyone else believes is wrong, and we are the only people in the entire world who are right. It's fucking mind-blowing to me. I also read in one source that part of the reason that the MRTCG felt that they needed to step away from the Catholic Church was the point of view on how communion was taken. So for any non-Catholics out there, I will explain really quickly that when you're a Catholic and you go to Catholic church, you have to attend these classes as a child, and eventually it leads up to you being able to take your first communion, which is a really big deal. The girls wear all white, and I can't really remember what the boys wear, but I do remember that before we took our first communion, we were told not to make any faces when we drank the body of Christ. I did not listen to this apparently, and because I'm animated as fuck, I made a horrific, sour yuck face when I tasted wine for the first time in second grade. Anyways, communion is taken at the end or towards the end of Mass for Catholics, and I have no idea how it is done now. I imagine it's totally different because this is gross, but when I was younger, we would all line up in an open aisle next to the pews that we had all been sitting and kneeling at in various times of what seemed like fucking days. Then we would wait in line and walk up towards the priest or whoever, and when it was our turn, we would be given this dry-ass wafer cracker thing and be told by the man, this is the body of Christ. And we would do our little Father, Son, Holy Spirit thing that you guys have probably seen on TV, where people touch their forehead, then their chest, then their left and right shoulder, and then we would eat the wafer. Then we were handed a huge communal cup of wine and were told, this is the blood of Christ. And we all sipped from the same fucking cup. And the priest would just wipe it with a cloth between people. Yeah. So for Catholics, there are a few things that were huge when I was in the church, and that was Sunday school, communion, and fucking kneeling. When you sat in the pews, there were actual pull-down kneeling pads on a long row that you would pull down in your row after everybody sat down so that your fucking knees would have cushion as you kneeled over and over and over. If anyone listening has ever been to a Catholic Mass, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Catholicism loves its kneeling and making sure that your ass feels less than worthy of the men who preach before you. Anyways, so the MRTCG felt that it was only correct to take communion as you were kneeling and not be allowed to hold it in your own hands. I've seen this both ways personally in the church. We used to just place one hand over the other because I believe for children we fed ourselves, but maybe some people just opened their mouths and were fed the wafer. I kind of remember that. So according to the MRTCG, you should be kneeling and I guess not touching whatever they used for food as the body of Christ. Also, I forgot to mention that the priest has to bless the wafers or whatever food someone uses and the wine, which I'm all but certain has to be something else now because the world has changed, and I'd be surprised if they still fed wine to kids in churches. Also, I wonder if all the fucking kneeling is why so many of us ex-Catholics have fucking knee problems. Even if the MRTCG believed that communion wasn't being given correctly, couldn't they have just chose to let the priest give it to them in their mouths and then just knelt before they ate it? Also, why the fuck did we eat the body of Christ and drink his blood? And people think that we're the weirdos because we like to listen to stories of cannibalism? Seems that our history is based on that shit, all right? Fuck your sideways glances. At some point during the peak of the MRTCG, the Ugandan government would come in and shut down the main worship house, or whatever it was called, and they would cite unsanitary conditions in the main compound, and they would also cite that the MRTCG was using child labor to be able to continue their operations of the plantations. They were also accused of kidnapping children so that they could quote-unquote supplement their ranks. Ugh. It was only a brief shutdown as the MRTCG was able to fix whatever they needed to be right back in Uganda's good graces. In 1994, it was said that Paul, remember he was the assistant to Father Dominic, along with about 70 other people who finally realized that this was a cult, would actually sever ties with the MRTCG. Paul would say that as he was being cast out for arguing with Father Dominic about the members having to give up everything they owned, probably for money or whatever for the leaders, that's when he was casted out. He then said Credonia told the remaining members to pray that Paul would die in the month of June. All through the year of 1999, there was tension rising as the MRTCG with the supposed apocalypse approaching. Juvenal would say that after Credonia and Joseph had moved into the same bedroom to allegedly get the Virgin Mary's messages together, he had snuck in one night to see what was going on, and he caught them having sex. Adultery. He said that he didn't understand how they could preach all day the 10 Commandments of God, and then at night break the 10 Commandments of God. I believe he's referring to thou shalt not commit adultery. Teresa, Joseph's wife, confronted them, and Credonia said that it was actually heaven that told her to basically beat the shit out of Joseph's wife, and she did it to the point where Teresa had to go to the hospital. Like, what the fuck? She then went even further and burned all of Teresa's possessions. One member would say that they would be called from the fields sometimes to pray for either hours or even days. He said sometimes they would get cold water poured onto their blankets and told that they needed penance. It's just torture in the name of God, right? God. Credonia expected complete obedience from the members and had said that whatever the leaders from the MRTCG said to do was quote-unquote God's will, even if that thing was murder. If it came from the leaders, although it may seem as a sin, it wasn't if they were the ones who commanded it. As far as discipline went, there was a small group known to be the blessed ones who would carry these out. Paul would recall seeing a woman one time who was beaten so severely for just talking that there was blood just gushing from her head. With AIDS running rampant at the time in Uganda, and as new members were coming in and selling all of their worldly possessions just to gain what they thought would be salvation, the cult actually claimed to be able to cure AIDS. Of course, this would bring in what one source would say was terrified widows of men who may have died from AIDS, and the women were afraid that they too had it, so they sought help from the MRTCG for curing them. They told one particular woman that she would be cured and that they had cured others because the Virgin Mary was powerful. They would then join and give over all of their worldly possessions to the leaders. So, as I mentioned before about the apocalypse, the MRTCG believed that the end of the world was coming January 1st in the year 2000. Oh yes, their own version of good old Y2K. Do you guys remember that shit? That shit was everywhere, and even for those of us who didn't really believe that anything was going to happen, I would be lying if I said that there wasn't a tiny spark of, oh shit, what if I'm wrong, right when that moment happened. That's good stuff. How the fuck are people my age normal? We went through some shit, let me tell you. I guess the first apocalyptic date was supposed to be back in, according to Credonia, like 95, and it didn't happen, and she kept changing the date, saying that God and Mary were supposedly postponing the day of the apocalypse. She claimed that because of all the members' prayers, that God was somehow showing restraint and pushing back the day. Which doesn't make any sense, because if the whole thing is to get up to God and to be like a part of his heaven or whatever, wouldn't you want that day to come sooner? Like, why would he have to show restraint? Anyways, some people started to realize that all the cult wanted was their money, and they weren't really offering anything. Sadly, many of these people were stuck because they had nothing left after selling all of their property and possessions. When January 1st, 2000 came and nothing in the world had happened, people were really starting to question whether or not this group and its leaders had any idea what they were doing, and they started to believe that they may have been full of shit. As more people were demanding their money back, the leaders of the MRTCG had to come up with a reason, quickly, as to why it didn't happen as they had thought. Credonia and the other leaders would come out and say they had the date slightly wrong, and now the end of the world was going to come on March 17th, 2000. And this time, it was going to come with a, quote, ceremony and finality. As the new date of the apocalypse grew closer, the leaders of the MRTCG had bought 70 crates of Coca-Cola, all I could think was the Kool-Aid, and 3 bulls, like cows, for the party or ceremony that was now said to be a 2-night event on March 17th and 18th. Credonia's driver would also remember that as the date was approaching, Credonia was wearing what he called a blood-red robe, and she was starting to sell some of the MRTCG's property as quickly as possible. Which is weird, because if the date of the supposed apocalypse was approaching, and you actually believed this, then why would you need to sell anything? Money would basically have no meaning, right? The followers were confused as to why she would be selling off property and what was going on. Anyone who questioned her would be then labeled by Credonia as being big-headed, and one member said that they would be sent off. On the evening of March 17th, the members of the MRTCG would all gather in the church, as Credonia had told them that the Virgin Mary had actually confirmed this time that tomorrow would bring the apocalypse. This was essentially the night that each and every member had worked towards and suffered for, that as the end of the world came, the members of the MRTCG in a few of their quote-unquote holy places would be saved and live on. They prayed and prayed because they still believed that Credonia was correct in knowing that God was going to send fireballs down from heaven, basically, and kill anyone who wasn't a part of their group, or even them if they didn't pray hard enough. That night, the other leaders or senior members would burn the rest of the members' possessions in a large fire outside of the church. Credonia was the only leader who showed up to the church that night, and one source would say that she had always preached to the members that God was going to come and take them away to heaven before he took anyone else. I'm a little confused if they're supposed to be, like, left here on earth and everybody else is going to die, or if they're going to heaven first. I don't understand. In the middle of the night, there would also be a follower, or possibly 2, that had snuck out of the church to find some food as the rest of the members had to fast. This young man was starving, and of course, he went out to grab something to eat. He then saw something curious. One of the members was carrying with him some nails and a hammer, and he was headed towards the church. The man then nailed all of the windows shut, as it had been told or prophesied already that these places the believers and the followers were in would become the new quote-unquote ark. In the decree, it would state that you would need to bring in some blessed material into the arks for lighting. Little did the members know what the leaders were bringing in was some of the 50 gallons of sulfuric acid that the leaders had recently bought. Sulfuric acid, after researching a little, is not only a corrosive substance, but can cause some seriously awful side effects when it comes into contact with your skin or if it's even inhaled. According to the Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety, I'm guessing this is like Canada's version of OSHA, sulfuric acid, if it's heated or misted, is extremely toxic and can cause death. It will cause severe irritation of the throat and nose, and if it comes in contact with your eyes, it can cause burns, redness, blurred vision, or even permanent blindness. If this stuff comes in contact with your mouth, it will burn your lips, your tongue, your throat, and your stomach, and again, cause death. I mean, this shit is acid. So that had been brought into the church for the end of the world. Then the windows had been boarded shut and the doors were chained and bolted shut as well. Suddenly, there was a huge blast, and people on the outside could hear screams of people on the inside. There was a huge plume of smoke, and screams were said to have lasted about 3 minutes before things went silent. Juvenal would recall running to the church and trying to hammer the door open, and when it opened, he said the smoke alone forced him backwards. He said inside all he could see were people burning. When locals and authorities came to the area to see what had happened and what could be done, they would describe the smell of fire, smoke, and the smell of burning flesh that was overwhelming. On the video, there was someone who had spoke about a sight that no one would ever forget when they saw a woman who had been badly burned, and this next part is disturbing, just an FYI. He recalled seeing the woman burned out completely, but that she had been pregnant. He said when she burned, her uterus opened up and the fetus had fallen out of her womb. The fetus had not burned, but it was just hanging there next to her open body, as the man described it, gory, horrific, and more than the people seeing it could bear. Oh my fucking God, the thought of that is just sickening. These poor, unsuspecting people who did not deserve this, nor the people who had to see everything. It's just pure carnage for no fucking reason. Well, maybe greed. 530 members of the MRTCG died that night within just minutes of the explosion and then the engulfing fire. On the first video I saw about this, they didn't give an exact number on adults versus children, so I assumed that there weren't many kids, since they didn't really seem to like kids in that cult much. But the second video would sickeningly say that a third of the people that were killed were in fact children. A third! Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, it's horrible. At first, the authorities believed that this was a mass suicide. Of course, this theory would be proven quite wrong. You could see that people were walking around on the video covering their faces and noses, and some of them were sort of holding herbs under their noses just to have a look around. They actually showed quite a bit on one of the videos. You should check those out. One man, who I believe was part of the authorities there, would say that there was a certain stench in the air, that when they would walk closer to the church, the smell would go away. But when they started walking towards the leader's home, the smell grew stronger and stronger. They went inside, and for hours they searched for the smell. They would eventually find underneath the floor in Credonia's room 6 men's decomposing bodies. They would find that the bodies had been hacked to death, and then they had been burned with acid, and then cemented in some sort of makeshift grave. Prisoners were sent to dig what they called a mass grave. The police were now rushing to find other people who had been sent to other properties to await the apocalypse as well. First, they had gone to Father Dominic's old house. They had talked to a neighbor who would say around New Year's there was a fence put up that would keep others out, and it kind of felt weird to the other neighbors. They said that the members that they saw often would be singing and dancing, but now after the fence was put up, it was all quiet. A neighbor said that when he saw them digging a pit-like type hole, that he thought the cult was just building a bigger bathroom, and they didn't even think twice. However, the neighbor did notice that people were coming and going. He said that they were coming in for classes and whatnot, and then they would leave, and he wasn't really sure where they went. When police searched the home, they would find 81 bodies stacked neatly underneath the home. On the video, you can see them pulling out some of the bodies. They were said to be all naked, and many of them had been strangled with their own rosaries. The authorities assumed they were drugged first because there weren't any signs of a struggle. Then, they would find another 74 people in the garden, and while they were showing these poor men just pulling out body after body, it was actually crazy to see that. It didn't seem real. They seemed like they were just fake, like sucked dry or like leather beings that were being laid outside. There were people all over watching this, even kids. I could not believe it. George, one of the neighbors, said that around the time of the murders, Father Dominic had been around and was pleasant and polite, and even bought the neighbors sodas and shook their hands like nothing was wrong at all. Upon searching other properties that the cult owned, they would sadly find another 100 bodies. With all of these dead bodies, the medical examiner had their work cut out for them trying to identify everyone. The members were buried as heretics and without any sorts of prayers, apparently, which is kind of sad because the members were led astray. So here's the kicker. They believe that the leaders may have escaped, or at least Credonia, because a witness saw her after the deaths and fires. Some believe that Joseph may have died believing in Credonia, but they couldn't identify him. It's believed that she escaped with all of the money that she had from selling everything and is still alive out there somewhere. It's widely speculated that the people killed in the homes before the church fire was set may have been the people who did not truly believe in Credonia or her leaders, and maybe questioned her or had suspicions about what was truly going on. The people who were able to escape or had been cast out before being killed would report that they truly did believe what they were doing was the right thing. They would say that although they were malnourished, overworked, and had sores on their hands and their feet, none of that mattered to them. On one occasion, a former member said that they would be told they were digging for a week, so they did. Then, on another day, they might be told that they weren't going to eat for a number of days, so they didn't. One woman in particular said that she left the cult finally when she had seen her 4 young children out searching for grasshoppers to eat. Thank God she got out with her children, or they too surely would have died with the rest of the members. The authorities in Uganda are sure that there are more graves and more bodies to be found, but they unfortunately don't have the resources to find them all, and so it remains a mystery. When all was said and done, at least 924 people were murdered by the members of the MRTCG cult, and Credonia has never been seen again. And that, my friends, is the story of the MRTCG, or the Movement for the Restoration of the 10 Commandments of God, and all of its culty, hypocritical glory. Wow, what a story, right? It's heartbreaking to think of all of the loss of life for no fucking reason other than these poor people were tricked, robbed, and murdered, all because they had faith and thought this would bring them closer to God. It's so fucking sad for all of the people, and especially the children, who didn't even get a choice in the matter. This is my own personal opinion, and I mean absolutely no offense to anyone, I swear, to each their own, truly. But I believe that it's one thing to stuff your own religious beliefs down your child's throat because you think your religion is the one true religion, but to bring them into a fucking cult? No way. I cannot believe how easily Credonia was able to steal from people and take it for herself. Why are people so obsessed with power and control over others? I read somewhere in my research that she had been obsessed with fire in her younger years and that she had allegedly burned down someone's house who had snubbed her, and that people widely believed that she had some sort of mental illness most of her life, but I wondered if she may have also had a personality disorder. Sorry, but something has to be seriously wrong with you for you to do what you did to those other people. I wonder, though, did she truly think that she was getting messages from the Virgin Mary, or did she know that she was full of shit and just pushed that onto people, knowing that it was a big deal at the time, and that they would do whatever she wanted them to if she was having these visions? Either way, the cult was a fucking nightmare, but I do wonder if people know that they're full of shit, or if they believe their own shit and thought that they were doing good at first. People widely believe that she killed everyone because she kept getting the supposed date of impending doom wrong, and eventually they were going to be pissed and want their money and shit back. So she killed them all and then took off with the money. What a horrible human being. There is no way she believes that she's actually going to any type of heaven that she believes in, though, right? Holy moly. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed learning about this fucked up cult as much as I did, and remember to keep your wits about you if someone is trying to sell you salvation. Come on back next Monday where we will cover another case here on The Kill File where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today. A few quick reminders before you go. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on your platform. It will help the podcast grow and other true crime lovers to find us. Also, check out the website, TheKillFile.com, where you can suggest a case, find our merch shop, and submit a listener file. Follow The Kill File on your favorite social media platforms. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and TikTok. Of course, you can always subscribe on YouTube as well. Find all of the links for the socials on the website. Come back on Mondays wherever you get your podcast fix when we will cover another case on the Kill File where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye.